So some people will hang on to their attachments because they love the idea of falling in love in that particular way, in that, I'm can't wait to find that person I can meet and just fall in love with and give all my love to and feel all their love, and we'll, go and have adventures around the world, and we'll do this and we'll do that. And I don't want to give that up. I so want to have that feeling of being in love. And that's legitimate. If that's where you're at, then you should have the experience that fits where you are in your journey. Now, the other obstacle to letting go of attachment, the other major one, is we tend to have this. There's this psychology around attachment where we think that because we want it so much, that means that somehow that will make it more likely for us to get it. If I want this, if I'm attached to it, there's something about my wanting it that will motivate me, will, get God to take pity on me, or, whatever the story is. If I want it badly enough, God will give it to me. If I want it badly enough, I will just keep searching and searching until I find it. And that really plays into, in particular, sort of the American psyche of, success at all costs, and just keep trying, hard work, put your nose to the grindstone, and keep pushing forward until, you've made your dreams come true. And there's something very powerful and beautiful in that mode of being, but it's also limited because it doesn't allow for surrender, and it doesn't allow for life to come to you and to bring you the things that you're working so hard to go out into the world and grasp and hold on to for yourself. So, so when a person is confronted with the idea that their attachments are causing them all this suffering, one of the resistances to letting go of the attachments, well, if I let go of the attachment, then I'll never get to have that love. I'll never get to have that job. I'll never get to have, this thing that, is so critically important to me. And so then it becomes really hard to let go of the attachment, because God, if I could just have that, then I wouldn't have to go through this whole emotional process of feeling all that pain from childhood and letting go of all the things that I've been holding on to. I can just have what I want. And again, there's a certain logic to that. And I am sympathetic to it. I've certainly experienced it, quite a lot on my own. But there's two flaws to that way of thinking. One is that your desire and attachment to something doesn't have all that much to do with whether you're going to get to have it or not. And in fact, when you're really in need of something, when you're attached to something and you just need it, what you're doing is you're broadcasting the consciousness of need. And in broadcasting the consciousness of need, the universe will mirror that back to you. The universe is just one big mirror. And so if you're in need, the universe will reflect back that need to you. And it's actually only out of grace that we ever wind up getting the things that we are so deeply attached to. Grace kind of does take pity on us from time to time and sends us the experiences that we need in order to, have a somewhat enjoyable life. And so there's these little moments, these little places where grace will bring something into your life that you were so desperate for. But without that kind of intervention from grace, the mechanics of how our universe is manifested, to my perception anyway, is that when you are in need, that creates more need. And when you are in abundance, that creates more abundance. And so one really hopefully relatable example of that is, again, going back to relationships. If you are really needy and you are hanging out with people and maybe there's an attraction to somebody, and so you exchange numbers and then you start texting them 10 or 20 times because you really want them to, pay attention to know how into them you are, like, let me just tell you, I'm so into you. Why don't you come and hang out with me? And so then you're texting and you're calling and you're looking them up on Facebook and friending them, and, you're doing all this stuff. And that's coming out of this need. well, that tends to be unattractive. That makes people kind of pull back a little bit. And so that's just a very, simple example that I think we've all experienced, probably on both ends, where somebody who's really needy of us, and it's like, I like you, but man, that neediness is kind of icky. Like, that doesn't feel good. That's not fun to feel, even if it is, flattering at the same time. And of course, we've all had people that we were really into, and it just wasn't reciprocated. Um, so there isn't anything that you can want that you can't make it harder to get than by being attached to it. The more attached to it you are, the less likely you are to get it. So when we're in that headspace of, well, I don't want to give up my attachment because then I'm never going to get the thing I'm attached to, I'm never going to get that relationship or that high paying job. In fact, what's happening is holding on to that attachment is kind of shooting yourself in the foot. You are blocking the most easeful path for that thing to show up in your life. And there's no reason why it shouldn't. If it is in the truth of your soul and in the truth of your being to have a certain kind of partnership or to have a certain kind of job, it'll show up. Just keep being authentic to who you are, and whatever is true for you to experience and for you to have in your life, that will show up when the time is right. You don't have to be attached to it. You don't have to be in a drama around it. You don't have to go, searching the four corners of the earth to get that need fulfilled. Whatever it is that is right and natural for you to have in your life will show up. And often those things are 10 times better, if not 100 times better than anything that we could have imagined for ourselves. So the strategy of attachment fails on that end. It actually inhibits getting what it is that you are wanting so much. And then the other side of it is that the only reason why you want that thing is for the feeling that you think it's going to give you. You want it in order to be this balm on some deep wound that you've been carrying. And so, yes, of course, you want that balm because you don't want to feel the pain. That's a very natural and self-loving thing to do. You want to take care of yourself and to heal what hurts. The problem with that goes back to what I was discussing at the beginning, which is that that attachment is there because there is a wound and you're not actually healing the wound. The attachment might be a balm for it for some period of time, but the ego is still there, its wound is still there, its story is still there. All of the dynamics that cause the attachment in the first place will be there even when the attachment has been fulfilled, because it's just, it's just a band-aid. It's just something that you can grab onto and feel better for as long as you can ride it out. But the need for it is because there is either a wound or there is this basic sense of separation, which is sort of the first wound, which is that separating from the divine. And what if you could get that feeling? What if you could get that feeling of wholeness and of not being wounded, but just being healthy and whole without the attachment? Well, then you get what you want. You want the feeling, you want the pain to go away. And if you're focused on the attachment, then you're actually, you're missing the mark. That can only help temporarily. But to really feel what it is that you want that thing to give you, which is, not to be wounded and hurt anymore, you need to go within. You need to meditate, do therapy, do whatever self-growth and self-healing process works for you. You need to use that to address the core wound. And in certain instances, that's going to be some sort of emotional issue that's caused by circumstances, like the parents that didn't show you the love that you should have gotten as a child. Go back to those feelings. Go back to that time in your memory when you were a child and this was happening, and feel it from a more adult, mature, and resourced place. And when you can just be with it, with your awareness, which has all this sort of healing power to it, then that can actually dissipate the whole story and the whole drama, and then the need for the attachment disappears. There is no attachment anymore because there is no wound anymore. There isn't the need for that balm to be used as sort of psychic first aid, but it's a it's a biodegradable bandage. Like, it's going to go away. It's going to break down at some point. So, being afraid to let go of attachments because you're wanting that attachment to make you feel better, and you're worried that if you let it go, then you're just going to be in a state of pain. It's understandable because the ego only knows life as an ego and only knows the things that have made it feel better and allowed it to continue to exist as an ego. So that's its story. That's, the limited reality that the ego is working with. That's all it knows is attachment makes me feel better. Oh, this hurts now. Well, I must have done the attachment wrong. Let me make a better attachment. That person sucked. Let me attach to somebody better. Oh, everybody gets sick. Okay, how about I, make sure that I'm really healthy, and I make sure that I feed them really good food and keep them healthy. They won't die before me. There's all this work that goes into maintaining these attachments and making sure that they don't turn on you. And the long-term solution throughout all of that is right inside. It's right here. You are the divinity that you are looking for. You are the healing that you are trying to get out of all of these circumstances and attachments. The catch is that you have to feel the pain that caused the wound in the first place. Somewhere in there, you have to feel it, process it, bring awareness to it, and let it move through you. And then all of that charge, all of that pain dissipates. And then you no longer have need for the attachment. Now, most people don't really want to do that. I don't want to do that. Nobody wants to do that. I would prefer just to feel better now, if that would be all right, but that's just not the way that our consciousness, our bodies, our energy systems are set up. When we feel something and it feels painful, and so then we try and get away from it, that just sort of stops that process of the movement of emotional energy from completing its life cycle. If you think of it as sort of rising up through the body, sometimes it does that, sometimes not, but we can just sort of think of it that way. And so you have something happen in your life and it's painful, like a parent dies. Well, you don't want to feel that, and so then you push it down. It's too overwhelming, it's too icky, I don't like it, I want it to go away, and so you push it down. And so it doesn't have a chance to have its full life cycle, to arise within you somewhere, and to be felt, very deeply. For as much, whatever is there, all of it needs to be felt. And it might not be a pleasant feeling, but if you stay with it, then it can complete its life cycle, and then it just dissipates. It's not trying to be immortal with you in this, sort of egoic way of trying to live forever, but only as a happy ego. Like, it's these emotional charges very quickly and easily let go once there is enough space for it to move through. So that's the solution, but that's something that the ego can't really wrap its mind around, and goes against its need to avoid pain. Now, speaking of avoiding pain, it's important to recognize also that the things that we avoid are also our attachments. It's the same energy that goes into pushing things away and avoiding them as it is to grab onto it and hold it close. It's if there is something that you are attached to that feels good when you bring it in, well, there are other experiences that you can have that feel bad. And so then it becomes important to push it away. That becomes an attachment because you basically become attached to the struggle, become attached to what it is that you are pushing away by way of that struggle. You actually, by struggling with it, you are engaging with it on some level. Even if it's not, happening presently, it's still sort of deep down inside you as this latent resistance and avoidance. And so it's constantly looking for that object, that person, or that situation to try and avoid it. And so it becomes part of your identity. I'm somebody who, doesn't swim because, I went swimming one time and I almost drowned. So I would have nothing to do with large bodies of water, with swimming or anything like that. And so then you get close to a lake and that avoidance comes up and you start pushing it away. And so that becomes your identity. You are a person who pushes water away or who avoids water and any chance of potentially drowning. So our avoidances become part of our identity, and it becomes part of our attachment strategy by attaching and pushing rather than attaching and pulling. You attach to it, you get a clear sense in your psyche, in your mind's eye. This is something that I don't want to have anything to do with. This is what that looks like. And you grab onto it and push. And then you're just in this sort of constant state of struggle with that thing. And then you're in a constant state of struggle with the things you're pulling into, because life is change. So life is going to send you things that you're trying to avoid and is going to eventually take away the things that you're attached to. And so in two ways, you are struggling with life. Your attachments are causing you to struggle with the natural flow of life. And so that causes even more suffering, because now you not only have this pain inside your soul that you're using these attachments to try and avoid, but now you're caught in this kind of existential struggle with life. And you might get mad at life, might get mad at God, might get mad at the people who are making choices that make it harder to pull in and push away. And all of this is threatening to touch on that initial wound that's down in the center of this whole dynamic, this whole affair. So as we are moving towards awakening, we want to be cognizant not just of the things that we're grabbing and holding on to as sort of what the ego does and how it is operating, and therefore how it's keeping itself alive. All these things that the ego identifies with through attachment is part of what keeps the ego going in its current state. And so, we have to recognize that that's what the ego is doing. It's just doing its job. And if we want to move into a different way of being in our bodies and in our lives, we have to recognize that our attachments are reinforcing the ego. Our avoidances are reinforcing the ego just as much. And so in order to awaken out of all of that, we have to at least be willing to surrender the things that we're attached to and the things, that we pull in and the things that we're attached to by pushing away. And so then those things can be helpful in terms of information. When we don't even know all of the attachments that we have or all the things that we're avoiding. There's just so much that got built in early childhood that by the time we're adults, we might have forgotten a lot of those things. They just become part of the air that we breathe. And so we don't notice that when somebody makes a certain kind of compliment, that actually bothers us because it assumes something, or it's the kind of compliment somebody who hurt you made. There's all these little things. And so if you can just sort of observe when you are attached to something, they can be like, oh, okay, there's that attachment energy. There's this thing that I think I need. And so let's dig a little bit deeper. So then there's this attachment, and you can just be with it and be like, okay, well, what is it about this thing that I'm attached to that that makes it appealing to be attached to it? Like what's the payoff there? And so then you go into this inquiry where you ask these kinds of questions, like, what is this feeling? What is it connected to? When have I felt it before? And in that process, you can trace back to the root, the original wound, the original pain that created, all of these coping mechanisms and attachments to begin with. And then once you get to that core wound, then you can bring your awake awareness to that and heal that and move through and let go of that part of your identity that is in some way supporting the ego and its story and its self-reflection that keeps it alive. So, so in that way, what had been sort of this detriment, this attachment stuff that was this basically maladaptive way that the ego found to make its existential pain less painful, and in the process made everything worse. When you take a new attitude and a new position with it, and instead of just sort of following the dictates of your attachments and avoidances, running towards the things that you're attached to and running away from the things that you're avoiding, if instead of just getting caught up in that whole game, you pause and you just recognize, oh, I feel really pulled towards this thing. Like there's this attachment there. What's that all about? And use that, then your attachments become a tool for you to awaken, for you to track down all these stories that are keeping the ego alive and pull apart those threads one by one. And when you pull apart a really deep thread, like let's say going back to this parental example, if you get to a point where you have healed that wound and thereby let go of that identity as somebody who feels bereft of parental love, but then you're still there. You've let go of that identity, and yet you're still there. And so then who are you? You spent all these years seeking some sort of parental figure, somebody who can help you to not feel that childhood wound. And that became part of who you are. And then all of a sudden you're not that anymore. And yet something persists. It's like, oh, okay, well, if I wasn't that, what am I? And then if you do that with, a second attachment, and you trace that back and you let it go. It's like, oh, I used to be somebody, who always needed to have the best job and make the most money. And all of a sudden, that isn't a thing anymore. And yet here I am, I'm still here. Well, then who am I? And so in that way, you're picking apart all the threads that make up the tapestry of the ego. Again, the ego is an identity, it's a feeling sense, but it's also a story. And if you can start to pluck out the threads of the story that make the ego feel like it's real, I am me, here I am, I've always been here, and for as long as I can remember at least, and I will just always be who I am. Well, that's what the ego is saying. But if you can show awareness within the ego that we can pluck these threads and you're still here, then that helps the ego to see that it's not any of it. If you're not the sadness, you're not the pain, you're not the abandonment, you're not the fear, you're not the anger, you're not any of these things, then at some point consciousness might look at all of that and say, well, maybe that's none of that is me. Maybe I'm not any of those things. Maybe all those things are different aspects, different expressions of something that has nothing to do with me. And that creates this beautiful window for awareness to recognize itself as something beyond the ego, something beyond that sense of I, that sense of identity, and awakening can emerge. Everybody's path is different. It may or may not happen in exactly that way, but it helps. You know, the more that you come to recognize that these things that you always thought were intrinsic to who you are as a human being on this planet, you recognize that that actually has nothing to do with who you are. You can discard that. You can heal it and move on from it and still be you. That becomes information for your inner consciousness to recognize, okay, maybe there's something even deeper that I can look at and connect with and recognize as my true essence. So so that's the bulk of what I wanted to put forth for you guys. The attachment, the phenomenon of attachment, is a function of the ego. It's what the ego does in order to remain an ego, to continue to exist, while having some sense of being able to heal its wounds, or at least have a temporary balm for its wounds. And it is a strategy that works up to a point, but anything that you become attached to becomes a potential for even greater pain once that thing has shifted out of your life or taken on a new form. And so it's ultimately not going to get you what you want when you engage in these attachments. When you're ready to step off of the roller coaster that takes things way, way, way up, which is fun, but then also takes things way, way, way down, which is not fun. When you're ready to leave that roller coaster, then the longer term solution that is permanent, you can start working on that. And that's what the process of awakening is. Awakening is about deconstructing that false self that was a vehicle for a lot of adventure and a lot of fun, but also a lot of heartache. And so when it's time, when in the depths of your soul, you're ready to move into a new way of being, letting go of attachment, letting go of avoidance, just being present with life as it is, and using those attachments and avoidances as a way to track to the very core of your being where you still have unresolved wounds, then that becomes its own awakening process. And eventually, if not in this lifetime, then in the next, that process will break down the ego to the point where it just lets go. And you can just be what you are without having to present anything, without having to try or strive or fight with life. You can just be who and what you are and enjoy the dance of life without having to fight with life in order to get the things that seem so important on that egoic level. So then my thoughts. Give you guys a moment to kind of mull that over, and if you have any thoughts or questions in response to that, I am available for that.
I'm also curious, do you plan these talks like heavily ahead of time, or does it just kind of come out of you fully formed?
I mostly just kind of think about the key elements that I want to make sure that I get to. These are things that I've thought about many, many times over and over again, and really confronted in my own process. I remember certain attachments that I really didn't want to let go of because I really just wanted what it was that I was attached to. And it was took a lot of kind of coaching myself to see the truth of what it was that I was wanting before I was able to finally let it go. But yeah, this is stuff that's all kind of stored in my brain. And once I have a sense of, okay, here's the main things that will cover what it is that I want to talk about, then I'm just kind of drawing on memory and experience and stories that I've probably told a number of times already.
Well, it's very well done. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Any other thoughts or questions that came up for anybody? Okay.
Can
Yes.
you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi. So first I want to say it's been, I don't know, 15 years since I've seen you.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And
Good.
yeah, I used to, I seen you a few times, about maybe 6 sessions when you first bought your house in Oakland.
Oh, gotcha.
That's,
I didn't buy that house, but yeah, I know what you're talking about.
okay, so anyway, you look, what's the word? You have a glow about you that you didn't have then. Your skin looks wrinkle free. Maybe that's the Zoom. You just look incredibly happy, energized, divine. And not that you weren't all those things 15 years ago, but I can really see the blossoming in you.
Mhm.
So I hope to be there soon.
Thank you. That's really amazing feedback, and it's a great uh, sort of contrast because you've had such a big gap of time. The last 15 years, I have put a lot of time and energy into my process, into my self-healing process, into this awakening process. There's also some early childhood trauma that came up in that time that really created a lot of tension in my system and in the way that I related. It was very kind of rigid and blocky. And a lot of that has opened up from having done so much healing on that early trauma. Um, so thank you so much for that really great reflection. And as you saw, there was a lot for me to work through. And even at that point, I'd been doing a lot of self-work for a number of years. But it does pay off. The more that I do, the better off I feel in my body, the more relaxed I feel in my body, and it does help with the wrinkles. with the,
It really shows in how relaxed you are in your body. I am 73, so I have been diligently working on myself more than 15 years ago, and I guess COVID and all that stuff, the isolation, uh, has really it's really taken me to the point where I'm sitting in on your class because I'm really sick of working on myself.
mm,
Really sick of it, you know. So I'm sick of the story. It's like, come on, you know. So, but there were a couple things that you said that made me take a look at attachments and what I am attached to. Um, through isolation, that really brought that out. You know, so um, I'm here for a reason, and thank you.
mhm. Thank you very much. Okay, well, it seems like everybody said what they had to say, so we'll close it up here. Thanks again for showing up today and for taking time for yourself and receiving the healing during the meditation uh, and whatever wisdom you got out of the talk. And I look forward to seeing you guys next time.